Good evening, all. My name is Juanita, and with me are Kelly and Ken. On behalf of us, I'd like to state our privilege and pleasure to be presenting to everyone today, albeit asynchronously. But following this notion on the use of technology, the topic we'll be presenting on today concerns the use of machine learning and natural language processing, or NLP for short, to understand public sentiments towards the authorities. Before we begin proper, we also like to extend our appreciation to our team for the help they have given over the course of this exploratory study. And with that, the conception of this study began as we observed that public sentiments, more so on polarizing issues, often disseminated rapidly on social media. Our deduction from this observation might simply be that social media has become a key communication platform. The latent power of social media should not be understated. A poignant example of this would be the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020. Originating in 2013, this movement concerns itself with issues like police brutality and racism, and has had quite a long history behind it, seeing as it had existed for close to a decade. Yet, the traction it garnered in 2020 was arguably unparalleled. Following the death of George Floyd that year, what had been a movement largely contained within the United States, alongside the United Kingdom and Canada, had gained traction particularly on social media and spread to other countries. Its destabilizing nature can be attested to by the eruption of protests that saw thousands to tens of thousands of participants. The likes of this were not seen before in terms of magnitude and countries in which citizens were involved. For example, many were not affiliated with the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. At the same time, situational uncertainty has been shown to have the potential to feed into such destabilizing forces, as the lack of situational control can generate fear. Fearful individuals, for instance, have been found to be more likely to make pessimistic judgments about the future. Moreover, negative attitudes can change according to the economic and social situation within a country, with such negative attitudes becoming more intense during economic downturn and periods of job insecurity. As we're still amid an ever-evolving pandemic, negative attitudes and negative emotions like fear could well persist or rear its head again in the future. This, in turn, could strain the relationship between the community and the government or law enforcement. The reason for this is that in both the case of polarizing issues on social media and in times of uncertainty, the government and law enforcement often act as regulators. In administering policies to deal with crises and upholding law and order, the government and or law enforcement could become the recipient of intense negativity from the public. If mishandled, trust in governance and law enforcement could unwittingly erode and consequently instigate even greater instability. As such, studying the public's dissatisfaction towards polarizing issues in society would be important for law enforcement agencies, for whom the currency of public trust is important. At the same time, it might also help agencies anticipate potential spillovers from the online sphere into the offline. And it's with this that we began concretizing our study. Importantly, we found that a previous study done by the Home Team Behavioral Sciences Center on polarizing topics in Singapore did find that polarizing views in Singapore did not occur over specific issues, but were government-centric instead. Notably, the government was implicated in many issues as a target, with negative emotions such as disgust and anger being directed towards them across multiple issues. As being a target of negative emotions does not necessarily involve being held responsible for being the cause of such negative emotions, we turn to a theory of blame forwarded by Mel and colleagues. In short, blame is distinguishable from anger and is thought to be a social cognitive judgment that's directed at a person, with the main aim of blame to be publicly regulating community members' conduct and ensuring adherence to social norms. And this next slide features the path model of blame, which uses different determinants like agent causality and intention for causing the event to decide on whether to assign blame to an agent or not. Besides blame, there is also a psychology of public dissatisfaction with the government. And since polarizing views in Singapore were found to be government-centric, we thought to identify different factors that may be driving such dissatisfaction as well. Specifically, Tyler proposed that perceived legitimacy in the government motivates rule-following behavior as compared to rewards or punishments, and comprises assessments of legitimacy, performance evaluation, and trust in their motives. Collectively, if these are addressed, citizens are thought to be satisfied and motivated to follow established rules by the authorities. In light of this study then sought to leverage machine learning techniques to identify and measure public dissatisfaction in Singapore so that the following research questions can be addressed, which are what are some of the drivers behind public dissatisfaction and which local entities are commonly associated with public dissatisfaction and satisfaction respectively. And while surveys have traditionally been used for understanding such public dissatisfaction, this study decided to use NLP technologies and machine learning instead, as they are more cost-effective and scalable. And the process was as follows. Firstly, we collected comments and posts from social media pages of media companies in Singapore dated from 2019 to mid-2020. We then filtered for data relevant to our study using keywords before proceeding to label a sample dataset. During the machine learning stage, a deep learning NLP model classified the text in the entire dataset, and this classifier had a high test F1 score of 92% when an others category was excluded. Lastly, data analysis was carried out. The categories for data labeling was adapted based on the literature stated earlier to form 4 categories for public sentiments, which was then split along 2 dimensions as shown here. The first category was with anger or positive sentiments, in which no specific reason was given for the sentiment expressed, such as by expressing shame or love in and of itself. The second category was belief in the legitimacy of government institutions, and this concerned itself with the authority of the government and its entities, which included aspects such as law enforcement. For low levels, there was public criticism that either questioned and or communicated disbelief in such authority, such as by questioning Singapore's justice system. But for high levels, there was affirmation, deference to, and or an acknowledgement of such authority, such as by saying Singapore is a democratic society. The third category was confidence in the ability of the government to deal with problems effectively. This concerned itself with the ability of the government and or its entities to address issues that affect the public in a satisfactory manner. For low levels, there was public criticism that questioned and or communicated inability, such as by blaming the government, by saying that they have lousy measures or poor understanding of the virus. But for high levels, there was affirmation, acknowledgement, and or communication of such ability, such as by commending a government agency by saying they really risk their lives. The last category was political and interpersonal trust, and this concerned itself with whether the public communicates that they can trust in the government, its entities, its actions, and or words. For low levels, there was public criticism that communicated how the public do not, are unable to, or are doubtful about whether they could trust them. But for high levels, there was an expression of public opinion that communicated such public trust, as shown from the examples here. And with that, I'll now pass the time to Kelly, who will present on the results of our exploratory study.
Thank you, Juanita. I'll now bring everyone through the findings of our research. First off, we'll look at some of the drivers behind public dissatisfaction and satisfaction. From this graph, we can see that majority of the comments shows public dissatisfaction, as depicted by the red graphs: low confidence in ability of government, low belief in legitimacy of government, low political and interpersonal trust, as well as high anger. These 4 categories make up a total of about 60,000 comments, whereas the contrasting categories which shows public satisfaction, as depicted by the green graphs: positive, high confidence in ability of government, high political and interpersonal trust, as well as high belief in legitimacy of government, made up of a total of only 10,000 comments. Unsurprisingly, public dissatisfaction tends to dominate the online space, with only 14.75% of comments being positive versus an overwhelming 85.25% of comments being negative. Aggressive and uncivil comments have become a constant part of computer-mediated communication. Emotion contagion research also indicates that presence of negativity can consciously or subconsciously affect online users' behavior and increase the manifestation of negative emotions. This further explains the large accumulation of comments with the same negative sentiment. Another observation that we had is that low confidence in the ability of government is higher than all other categories. One possible explanation for such is that there is an underlying social contract for authorities in Singapore to be competent. Hence, when there is a violation of such expectations, it is very likely to provoke a strong response from the public. Next, we will look at which entities are commonly associated with public's dissatisfaction and satisfaction, starting off with dissatisfaction. We looked at different texts and extracted out the entities in them. If they are Singapore-centric entities, we will retain them for analysis. As seen in this slide, this is an overview of all categories where a relevant Singapore-centric entity, be it positive or negative, was mentioned. These entities include Singapore, ruling party, government, opposition parties, general elections, parliament, etc., and etc. As you can see, the top three Singapore-centric entities mentioned were Singapore with 42.5%, ruling party with 24.4%, and government with 12.3%. We will only be focusing on these top 3 entities. For Singapore, the top 3 categories associated are low confidence with 3,359 comments, low belief with 2,079 comments, and low trust with 1,306 comments. On this slide, as well as the following slides, Example comments of each category of each entity will be shown. If you're interested in reading the comments, you can click and pause to read them in depth. Moving on, for the ruling party, the top 3 categories associated are low trust with 1,321 comments, anger with 1,034 comments, and low belief with 976 comments. For the government, the top 3 categories associated are low confidence with 1,050 comments, low belief with 822 comments, and low trust with 253 comments. The top 3 categories of the top 3 entities indicate that public dissatisfaction tends to be grounded in specific reasons and is not just general expressions of anger. This means that people's dissatisfaction is actually explainable, and the root cause of such consequences is the government's actions. According to Tyler, which is from our literature review, public dissatisfaction tends to be linked to ethical judgments of what the government has done rather than an emotional reaction. Continuing on, I will review the opposite, which is which entities are commonly associated with public satisfaction. Same as for dissatisfaction, we'll only be reviewing the top 3 entities, top 3 Singapore-centric entities, Singapore, ruling party, and government. Starting with Singapore again, the top 3 categories are associated with Singapore are positive with 465 comments, high confidence with 408 comments, and high belief with 347 comments. For the ruling party, the top 3 categories associated are positive with 406 comments, high trust with 129 comments, and high belief with 78 comments. For the government, the top 3 categories associated are high confidence with 126 comments, positive with 64 comments, and high belief with 60 comments. Interestingly, the reverse holds true for public satisfaction. There are more positive comments than that of high confidence, high trust, and high belief, which is the opposite of Tyler's theory as mentioned previously. Next, Ken will be presenting on the limitations and implications of our study.
Thank you, Kelly. Now we will discuss the limitations and implications of the study. Firstly, there will be a natural difference in terms of the results when you use methods that look at online sentiments or as compared to traditional offline methods such as surveys or interviews. So for example, the recent Edelman Trust Barometer found that there is actually high public trust in government, and that public trust in the government is quite high for public institutions as well. However, this does not mean that online methods of measuring public sentiment is invalid, as there are studies which indicate that sentiments expressed in the online comments can actually have an influence on readers, as it was found that people tended to echo the sentiments expressed by strangers and actually share the same opinions and attitudes with them. Another limitation is in the data that was collected. We collected data from English language sources and also collected data from a few social media pages. So actually more insights can be yielded if you look at other languages such as Malay, Tamil, or even Chinese. And you can actually get more insights if you actually looked at different sources of data such as messaging platforms like Telegram or open websites such as Hardware Zone. And one thing to note about this study is that this is actually an exploratory study that we use machine learning to actually label social media data. Future work can be done to link the various types of public dissatisfaction with the government to actual rule breaking or rule compliance behaviors. And also, we actually measured variations in the different types of public dissatisfaction. And this provides us one single dimension for analysis. So we can actually do more interesting analysis by combining insights from network analysis or time series analysis itself. Now we talk about the implications of the study. So the next implication is about how it actually contributes to the existing literature. This study actually develops a novel and theoretically grounded approach to empirically measure online public sentiments. Existing works tends to use atheoretical approaches such as positive or negative sentiment, or essentially just labeling a piece of content as high trust or low trust. So when we operationalize constructs from the literature about public dissatisfaction, this can actually yield analysis that is actually grounded in theory and actually can consequently provide a very rich layer of analysis. And in terms of policy and practice, the approach outlined in this study can actually do a few things for practitioners. One is that policies that aim at building public trust can be more evidence-informed, especially when it uses a more fine-grained and empirical approach when you study online spaces. And also, when you leverage machine learning methods, you can actually have some degree of data-centric sense-making about public dissatisfaction from online chatter in a quick and efficient manner. And with that, we come to the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for your time.